is going to be about how you really embed a really good strategy for canvassing and how you support your volunteers. So the objectives are going to be us reflecting as a group on why canvassing is so important and why the good practice matters. Understanding some of what that good practice looks like, and again, some space to reflect on how we embed that, so how we support volunteers to do it well, and also to build consistency within our teams about data collection and having good conversations on the doorstep. So one of the questions that I want us to think about is how we, why we're here. Okay, so we're all here tonight on a Monday evening, learning how to get the best out of volunteers within our election strategies. So I just wanted people to give me some reasons about why getting Greens elected is important to you. And people can just chip in, or you can put it in the chat as well, and Helen can read it out if you're feeling a little bit shy. Anybody?
To create more balance in politics. That's what I feel like sometimes, that we need to have a bit more balance, a bit more, platform to share voices.
Yeah. So that would be about making sure that sort of like the green agenda gets heard, and that there's some balance against, particularly I think at the minute, a lot of people are very concerned about like the rise of reform and that sort of thing. Is that the type of thing you were thinking of, Naseem?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, is giving them a better choice.
Fantastic. I can't really see hands, so I'm going to let Helen call out names if that's okay.
Yeah, there's Emmy Williamson.
Oh, hello, Emmy.
Hello, Laurie. Yeah, well, for us, we've got a fully conservative, massively conservative council, and we're hoping to get the first Greens on there. We don't think anyone's really holding them to account properly, particularly with issues around the environment and climate and sustainability.
Great.
Thank you, Emmy.
And Linda Sawyer.
Hi, thanks. I would just echo what Emmy just said there, actually, except for our council, it's Liberal Democrats. The official opposition is a group of 4 people, that's it, plus a couple of Tories. The rest of them are Lib Dems. But for me, a lot of what's been said in the chat, actually, for me, this is about ultimately national power. So this is part of a bigger thing. Getting Greens elected at a local level is part of how we get Greens elected at national level and how we make real change.
Amazing. Thank you, Linda. Have we got anything in the chat, Helen?
Yeah, very similar issues that Labour doesn't get it either. We're the only ones who do. We need change. We need to hold everyone to account. We need higher standards of behaviour. We need Greens in the room. Yeah, all that good stuff.
Fantastic. So I think we're all in agreement that it is really important for all the reasons that we've said, particularly in the political climate at the minute. So we know that getting Greens elected is really important for all the things that we've touched on and even more. But I want us to give us a little bit of think about how canvassing is really important to strategy for getting Greens elected, getting those Greens in the room that are going to hold, other parties to account, be an alternative voice, get real action on the things that we want. So again, throwing it open to everybody, I want people's thoughts on all the reasons why you think canvassing is important. Like what's so about doing canvassing as well? Sorry, Helen, I spoke over you.
Colin Noble's straight in there with his hand.
Yeah, so I couldn't resist. Basically, data collection and data analysis. We live or die by data.
Yeah, fantastic. Great answer, Colin. Thank you. Has anybody else got any thoughts about what other reasons why canvassing might be important?
In the chat, it's showing that we're not mad hippies who live in caves, but also that we get to use our time efficiently because leafleting isn't enough. Yeah, to show ourselves, to find out where the green votes are. People really appreciate having their doors knocked on and getting the chance to chat to a human being.
They do.
That we are serious, that we want to hear from people.
Yep.
And dear Linda's got her, Altringham has got her name up too.
Good evening, everybody. It's for me. I noticed that people, the Green Party has often stood paper candidates, and if you go canvassing, they realize that you are genuine about being elected, and you're not just a name on the card. So I think it's just reinforcing the fact that you are real and you are really interested in being elected.
Yeah, thank you, dear Linda.
And also, sorry, just to add on that, I didn't raise my hands there. Just to add on that, it also is a great opportunity for us who goes out on canvassing to learn about the community and learn about actually listen to the people and listen to the problems and actually go and see what you're trying to represent. I think that gives also a really good window to understand that, which makes it even better for you when you actually win or go and talk about your areas. Then you know what you're talking about, because then it's really engaged, really related, and a lot more transparency.
Yeah, thank you.
There's Duncan. Ali's got his hand up too.
Yeah, I was going to say the same as Naseem, really. It's an opportunity to engage in a conversation, to learn about the people you want to represent, and to share your ideas and values with them. So yeah, it's a two-way opportunity. Listening is very important, I think, in these election situations.
Yeah, I think we do lots of that in the long campaign, don't we? And it is really, really important, exactly what you say. Like, unless you engage with your community, you're actually not going to know exactly what the issues are. You can take a good guess, but unless you speak to people, you don't know. When we move more into the short campaign, the canvassing as such, this period, within the election period, 6 to 8 weeks out, that's slightly more about the data collection and the squeeze messaging. But I think you're both exactly right. We do need to do that listening as well, because as Dylan touched on, people really appreciate the fact that we've actually been out and spoke through them face to face. So I will go over the main points that I've brought up before about why canvassing is important, and I think a lot of these were touched on. So we've got it is about gathering data, like Colin said, and I'll come back to that on the next slide. But as I think people kind of touched on in slightly different wording, we get the chance to connect with voters emotionally. So they see us as polite, professional, friendly, well presented, not hippies who lived in caves, as somebody said in the chat. That's exactly what this is. You are showing them that you are like them. You're giving them a reason to vote for us and asking them to vote for us as well, which is not something that we necessarily do in the long campaign. That is more about the community issues, and like I said, learning about the community. This is where we actually go and ask people and give them a good reason, and giving people time to actually think about who they're going to vote for. So most people are not as engaged politically as we are, they might not even realise there's an election coming up until we tell them. So until we give them that opportunity on the doorstep to actually think about who they might be voting for, that might be the first time that voter has actually thought about that properly. And obviously, one of the biggest reasons we canvass, aside from this, is so that we can identify who is likely to vote for us, who's going to vote for our opponent, and who is potentially going to vote for the third parties who can't win in this area. So then we can figure out who we have persuaded, who's not going to be persuaded, because there are a set of people who won't be persuaded, and then who still needs persuaded for us to win. So those third party voters, they will need a message. So then the data that we gather here enables us to deliver those targeted messages. We've got no other way of doing that other than canvassing. We won't know where the Labour voters are, for example, until we ask the person who they're voting for and they tell us for Labour. We can't, this is how we find that out, so we can deliver those messages. And also, as I hopefully you all know, this is where we find our Green voters so that we can remind them to vote on polling day. And I think a lot of you here tonight will be experienced and know that polling day operation can make the difference between winning and losing. But again, without that canvassing data, we have no way of knowing where those voters are. So it's absolutely crucial to our campaigns. I would like to give people a couple of minutes again, just to discuss and give thoughts, to think about what might happen if we didn't do canvassing well. What would be the consequences of that? Do people want to come in on that? You may even have your own experiences of not having a brilliant canvassing operation in a previous campaign and then improving it and the difference that it made. Does anybody want to go?
We will lose.
That is a great one. That is an absolutely great one. Yes. The likelihood of you winning without canvassing is very, very slim. Anybody else got any thoughts?
If we don't do it well, we end up spending a lot of time on each doorstep, maybe wasting time. Would that be?
Yeah, I think that's brilliant, Emmy. Yeah, it is. And I will touch on this a bit later in the sort of training session about how actually we do need to make sure that we are using our time really efficiently and we're doing it and that we're using it well. So I think that's a great one, Emmy. Anyone else got any more thoughts, or shall I go and give you my thoughts?
In the chat box, it's just saying that, you know, bad canvassing just wastes money. It demotivates activists.
Yeah.
You just end up with chaos and unchallenged misinformation, low turnout. We just don't convey that we're different to the other parties. Bad canvassing can actually put people off.
Yeah, that's a good one, actually, because one of the first things I've put on there is that if we don't do it well, we could actually alienate and upset voters and give a bad impression. So it is really important that, again, canvassers are really well trained and they understand what they're doing and why. We can get inaccurate and inconsistent data. So if we aren't training canvassers well, and there's not consistency built in, that could then have a knock-on to our campaigns with it being unsuccessful. So I just, on the previous slide, talked about being able to target messages to certain types of voter. If we're getting the data wrong, people are going to be getting the wrong messages, which will affect the campaign. And Naseem said, we don't win, you know, which is the last thing that we want when we're putting all this time, effort, energy into getting Greens elected, and for all the important reasons we talked about right at the beginning. We know canvassing is one of the most impactful tools that we've got in election campaigning. So thinking about that, we need to think about if we're doing enough canvassing. So obviously, the more data we've got, the more doors we knock, the more impact that's going to have. And if we're doing it effectively, because it can be the difference between winning and losing in a campaign. And as we talked about before, it's so important to our campaigns that we can't really afford to be doing it badly. And as Emmy talked about, all the people who are helping us do this are giving us their time freely, okay? And that's a gift, okay? It's an amazing thing that people do this, so we've got to use their time well. And we often, everyone could do with more volunteer time, couldn't they? So we're often stretched, so we've got to be using that time really well and really effectively. So touching on that, we know that not everybody wants to canvass. In my experience, you know, people here tonight, I am guessing that you are quite comfortable canvassing, but you may not have been to begin with, and not everybody is. Again, I'd like us to think about what barriers might be there to people canvassing and how canvassing might make people feel and how we can build confidence. And I'd really like to hear from people if they have really good real life examples of this as well, because we're all here to learn from each other. So if we wanted to go with, if anyone's got any thoughts about barriers to canvassing, what we can do with those, how canvassing might make people feel.
Hi, Laurie. Angela here. I did my first canvassing this week. And I know when I first heard about it, so that would probably be about a year ago, maybe 18 months ago, I thought, no way, I'm not going to be doing that. And actually, I was quite nervous about doing my first delivery for paperwork, and it's lovely. So I think the barriers are having some experience with somebody, going alongside somebody, and just actually understanding what it is. The barrier is the perception that it's going to be uncomfortable and awkward. Yeah, but it's not. Well, sometimes is, but you're all right.
Yeah, I think that is really common. I think it could probably be summed up, couldn't it, of not knowing what to expect. So very often people are not even sure what canvassing is. And they're going to be quite nervous about doing it for the first time. I think most people will be. And I think that's a really common worry of people.
I was never good at canvassing. I'm still not good at. I think one of my fear is when I get questions asked about other politicians or issues around where I have no idea about it, and I get really, I guess, on the spot, I might get frustrated because I don't know which way I need to answer, and where the political party stands on certain issues. And some questions that may not be related, but obviously people would like to hear our views as an individual. So that's where I feel I'm not very comfortable kind of having those kind of Q&A sessions on those areas. That prevents me going to a lot of places because I just feel like I don't have enough political knowledge to be able to answer some of those questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Linda Sawyer's got her hand up too.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess my fear had always been about confrontation, people being rude and nasty to me. And I think I have to now make a bit of admission here. It is true that that can happen. I have done it myself to people who have knocked on my door, usually Tories. So I know it's real. But we weren't canvassing as such. We were doing 60-second surveys. But I had an experience with somebody who was rude to me. And I wrote it down what he said because it just shocked me so much. But it actually made me laugh. And he said, I knocked on the door. Hi, I'm from the Green Party. He said, good God, no thank you, no way. And I actually realised that was actually quite funny. and it's now kind of made me think I don't have to get into a confrontation. I can just, okay, that's how you feel. Thank you very much. I'll move on. It's funny.
Thank you. And there's Colin Noble with his hand up too.
Yeah, I'd just like to sort of counter that last remark and say I've been canvassing for many years, both for Labour in the former life and more in recent years for the Green Party. I never had one bad experience, literally not one. Never, I mean, not bad in the sense that, no, thank you, we're not interested, if that's bad, but never anybody rude or aggressive, never. And I'm always heartened by the fact that people, even if they disagree with you, are generally very courteous. And maybe that's because I'm from Yorkshire and everybody else in Yorkshire is great. But I don't think so. I think generally people are not rude on doorsteps.
Yeah, so just to sort of touch on that a little bit, actually. I did some training a couple of weeks ago, and I've done it for a few years now, which covers the basics of canvassing for first timers or quite new people. And if people are interested, drop me a line, and I can send you that training and point you in the direction of a recording. And in that, I give lots of tips about what Nassim was talking about how to handle if you get questions, and there's a way to do it, and we follow a script, etc. But yeah, in my experience, like Colin, I've knocked on thousands of doors, and it's very, very, very rare to have a bad experience, or even a slightly negative one. But I always say the thing I always say about this is, the worst you will probably get is slightly annoyed indifference. That's usually the worst you get, which is, oh, no, thank you, door closed. It is rare for people to be rude, even rarer for people to be in any way aggressive. So if that reassures anybody here who is slightly newer, but yeah, I would direct people back to basic canvassing training on that. So I suppose, to touch on this, to go back about how we maximise the impact of our canvassing and volunteer time, a lot of it really does come down to a good script. Okay, a lot of those barriers that people face, if they are well trained and they have a good script to stick to, that often combats almost all the barriers. Like Angela was saying, you know, please do pair people up with an experienced canvasser to begin with. Please don't ever send anybody off by themselves for the first time, or you won't be seeing them again. You know, it is about just supporting them with the script, with lots of training. And again, about how we maximise the impact of our canvassing, collecting good data. For all the reasons we talked about, it's absolutely vital that the data that they're collecting is really quality and really consistent, so that we are respecting both their time, but also getting the best that we can for our election campaigns. So although I said that I wasn't really going to touch on basics tonight, I am going to spend a couple of minutes just now running through, again, because I think even with the most experienced of canvassers, it's worth embedding this, is what data you're collecting and how you collect it and what it should look like. So when we're collecting data, all we're needing at this point in the campaign for the short campaign is 2 separate pieces of data. So what we need is who the resident usually votes for at local elections, so who they've previously voted for, and how likely they are to vote for our candidate in the upcoming elections. That's what we're doing when we're canvassing. We're getting those 2 pieces of data. So although we are having that connection with people on the doorstep, they're seeing us face to face. And I think we talked about listening to people outside of the short campaign. During the short campaign, we need these 2 bits of data. And sometimes a good way to think about this is one piece of data is in the past, how people used to vote, and that may have been green, but it's very often a different parter, and then how likely they are to vote for us in the future. So when you have your script, you will be asking questions. So you open it, but you always ask these 2 questions. You ask, who do you usually vote for at local council elections? And that will be the letter, okay? And that's all you need from that part of the conversation. And then the second question, would you consider voting for our candidate? That is your number from 1 to 5. So very, very keen people will be a 1, people who are absolutely never going to vote for us are a 5, and the people who are still not sure are on a 3. So your canvassing data should come back looking like this, okay? So, you know, a lot of the time, you know, you will get L1s, for example, because people who used to vote Labour will be voting Green this time. So the 2 pieces of data are 2 separate things. Is this the sort of thing that people are getting back consistently from their teams when you go out canvassing? I can see Colin nodding, and I hope everybody else is nodding. Okay, this should be what you're getting back from your volunteers. Okay, if you are not, well, actually, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, actually. How might you be able to spot possible issues with your canvassing data coming back that it might not be quite right? Has anybody got, I've got a couple of experiences with this personally myself, but I'll just see if anybody else wants to give examples of when they've felt that something's not quite right here because this is looking strange. What might...
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
I've noticed one canvasser particularly comes back with DK for party a lot, and I've checked whether he's, you know, he's asking, I mean, whether you go a bit more specific. If people are saying they don't want to tell us, this is happening quite a lot in our area, they don't want to say, but is there a way that this particular canvasser might not be prompting it enough?
It is very possible, Emmy. So that is a good one to touch on, actually, if you're getting back a lot of don't knows. In fact, I was talking to a campaign just today where they've got loads of don't knows in their canvassing data. And I suggested, and I'll touch on this a bit later, that again, they might want to run through training and this again and the script with their volunteers. Because I think sometimes, particularly with asking about voting intent, voting history, some people are still really quite timid about this. They feel, well, it's a bit rude to ask people how they vote. So it might be that that volunteer is lacking the confidence to be asking that question. Or they're not that you would push it as such, but he might be keen to get past that bit because he might be feeling a bit uncomfortable about it. So that is a good one, actually, Emmy. I can see a John Barley as well. I can see hands coming up now. Don't steal your job, Helen, but yeah.
Hiya. So
John.
one of the, I mean, we get a lot of would not says. Well, we don't. Well, it depends which area we're canvassing. We get a lot of would not says, which, depending on the nature of the area, we tend to interpret those as either shy Labour or shy Tory. So if we know it's a strongly Conservative area, we'll go, well, they're not telling us because they're likely to vote Tory. Same, I mean, we get a handful of don't knows, and I completely agree with what you're saying that, you know, sometimes it's a case of we need to be clear about what the script is. But one of the issues we get from time to time is that it comes back and it's you instead of just being, you know, Labour, Conservative, Liberal, Democrat, you'll get, you know, L/LD. Well, which? Who did they vote for? And some, I mean, you know, there always are going to be floating voters. There are people who are going to say, well, last time I voted Labour, time before that I voted Conservative, and the time before that, you know, I voted for Queen Victoria. But, you know, it's like, what is it? So what would you do in that situation? Would you just say to the person who's actually doing the canvassing, just ask who they voted for last time? Or would you say, well, okay, we know some floating voters, we'll just put it down as a floating voter?
Yeah, I would be doing exactly what you said, John. I would be sort of telling your volunteers, you know, if somebody is a bit wishy-washy, just try and pin them down on, can you remember who it was you voted for in the last council election? You would always get a few, but I think some of them you can let go. But if it's happening an awful lot, that's potentially an issue again with how confident your volunteer is or how well trained they are. And again, it's down to us to try and spot those problems and see what we can do with them. Has anybody else got any examples of issues that come up, or how you might be able to spot if your data's looking a bit iffy?
Denise Crackgill's got her hand up.
Yeah, it was really a question though, not an example. How do you go about delivering the script to people, training them on the script? I mean, this is quite a short script, so it's quite clear. Sometimes it can be longer, but how do you go about getting the key points across, but dealing with the, you know, the feeling that you can't stand there and read out a script like you're in a call center? You need to engage and come across properly. So how do you tackle that?
I am going to touch on this on a different slide. I will do it now, Denise, and we can always skip over it later if we need to. I think it's a really good question. And what I would say is it's practice. So in terms of how you deliver it, I know of a local party around here that will not let people canvass until they've done canvassing training. So until somebody has sort of sat down, explained what we're doing, why we're doing it, how you collect data, this is the script. I know not everybody's got that luxury, but at the minimum, you would be, say your action day starts at 10, you'd probably be asking people to come at least 15 minutes earlier and just doing a basic run through with everybody. Even people who've done it a million times, it is just a quick reminder. You are asking this question, that's your letter. You're asking this question, this is your number. This is the numbering system, 1 to 5. This is the script, please stick to it, this is why. And it's just about practice. I don't know about anybody else, but I find when I go out canvassing, the first few doors, I'll always kind of mess up the script ever so slightly. I'll trip over it, or I forget to ask one of the questions or something. But by the time I've done a few more doors, you just get into the swing of it. And as long as you are remembering to open well, so that people don't immediately close the door. Open well, make sure you're getting those 2 questions in. Most people will be okay. So I think really, Denise, it's about training and it's about practice. And people will naturally get into their own rhythm so that they don't sound like a robot. But yeah, it's just all about practice, really. Just to go back to the reminding people about the 1 to 5 numbering and what you're collecting, this is my example of how you might know that there's possible issues with your data collection. So one time we were in the middle of a campaign where we have already got Green councillors elected. So it wasn't a re-election as such, but it was for a county council seat where we'd got borough seats. And one of my canvassers gave me her sheet, off she went. I sat down at home, started to input the data to see an absolute swathe of G4s and 5s. And I was like, oh my goodness me, what have we done? Because G4s and 5s would be people who previously voted Green and are very unlikely to vote Green in the next election. It turned out that that particular canvasser had just forgotten which way round scoring was, and she was doing it backwards. So it was absolutely fine. But it's little things like that that you need to look out for, so you know what intervention you need to help your volunteers, again, get the most out of their time and that we're getting quality data. So it's just, and that person, by the way, had canvassed several times before. She'd just forgotten that day because no one had reminded her. So again, that's why it's important to do it almost every time you go out, almost to the point where people get slightly fed up with you telling them. But it's always worth it so that one person isn't sort of like left.
I was just going to add to that. I always, on an action day at lunchtime, I always review people's sheets as they hand them in to me, because there's a few times where I've picked up on people mixing up 1 and 5.
Yeah, it is quite common.
And another thing I wanted to say was, especially in Herefordshire for the general election campaign, we were finding a lot of people saying, oh, just not Conservative, never Conservative. And we were having a go at kind of probing them of, oh, you know, so what is the party you do support? And it was just, people weren't finding that useful. The person on the doorstep wasn't finding it useful, and we weren't finding it useful. So we ended up just having an NC, Never Conservative code, which worked fine in our area, worked well for us. Andrew has also got his hand up.
Hey, hi there. One of the things we struggle with is, especially with houses with multiple occupants, we don't necessarily know that we are actually talking to the right voter, or there might be several people who vote in the house and we don't know which one of them we're talking to. Is there something, I mean, do you always ask for the name, or what's the approach to that?
So this question comes up a lot, and I have my answer for this. Helen might have a slightly different one. So usually when you've got your marked registers, you'll have the list of people in the house with their names, won't you? So if you have those on your sheets, you can have the conversation. Then you can say, "Can I just check? Was it Andrew? Am I speaking to Andrew?" Okay, and that person will either say yes, no, whatever. But again, with it being extra people in the house, so the other question that's slightly related to this that also comes up is, do I ask to speak to other people in the house when you know there's 3 people that live there, for example? I would say with all of these things, you're going to have to use a certain amount of judgment and emotional intelligence. So some people, you've had a nice conversation or what have you, you can say, is there anybody else in the house who would like to speak to me? Okay, but you've got to use your judgment because you might be pushing it a bit too far. So if you've had that nice interaction, but you can feel that, your time's kind of up on the doorstep, that extra little push might undo some of the goodwill. So my advice is always use your judgment. But Andrew, you have got the list there, and you can say, can I just check, is it Rachel that I'm speaking to?
Yeah.
And that's how you would then record it, because not everybody in a house does always vote the same way.
Yeah.
And you will sometimes find that when you go back again, or sometimes when you go back to knock up, you'll get the wrong person in the house. And you might get somebody coming back saying, oh, that person's like a 4, but that's not the original person they spoke to. So if you can get that information and assign it, and sometimes you can take an educated guess as well.
Yeah, sure.
You know, but when you look at the names, you know, sometimes you can probably tell who that's going to be. So if, say, for example, I don't know, there's only one obviously female sounding name in the house, and you've spoken to them, you know, you can probably safely assume that that's who it was. Do you have anything to add to that, Helen? Because I know people do it slightly differently.
Yeah. Yeah. So in Herefordshire, we've never had names on canvassing sheets and never asked to check names. I suppose in more rural areas, there are probably fewer homes with multiple occupants, and we're dealing more often with family units. So yeah, I've always avoided using names, because also it just doesn't put some people's backs up about how do we know this personal information about them. Yeah.
It's a tricky one, Andrew. It's a really good question.
Okay.
I think it's one of those of using your judgment. Like Helen says, some people can find it really weird that you know their name.
Yes, yeah, we've had that.
But then very often, like, people do understand that you have the electoral register and that their name will be on it. A lot of people just accept that that is, you know, a usual thing for a political party to have, but by the same token, other people won't like it.
Thank you.
All the hands up are gone crazy now.
Ooh.
So, and there's Rachel first. Oh, Rachel, are you still there?
Sorry, I missed what you said, Helen.
Oh, you had your, yeah, there we go.
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to ask about the numbering, because one of the things that I always find difficult is choosing between 3 and 4, I think, and also what impact does that have on your, you know, what you decide to do about it. I mean, I think you always encourage people to be, I think there's always a tendency of canvassers to be optimistic, because they kind of want to tell you what you want to hear.
Yeah.
So they're likely to sort of come back with a higher number or a lower number than perhaps is justified. But on the other hand, if they come back and say everybody's a 4, do you then miss out on opportunities to talk them up, you know, talk them into being green? Do you see what I mean? Do you start to disregard them when perhaps you shouldn't? So I think that's a really difficult one.
Yeah, it's a good question, Rachel. And I'm glad you brought it up, actually. I would say tell canvassers to on the side of pessimism, because the impact of being overly optimistic is slightly greater. So if people are being, like you said, Rachel, people do want to think, you know, that this is, oh, it's great, and I think maybe they were going to vote for us. But the danger is if you put someone down as a 2 when they were actually a 3, come polling day, you are going to knock them up and potentially be bringing out voters for your opposition. And the second thing is it can skew your data. So particularly in multi-ward campaigns, you are using that data to figure out where you're going to prioritize your resources. So if your data is kind of too optimistic and you think, oh, actually, you know, it's fine with, there's loads and loads of 2s in that ward, but actually there's loads and loads of 3s, you might move resource out of that ward into another one when it actually needs to be there, and run the risk of, again, like seriously impacting your campaign. So I think it's, yeah, my answer would be yes, please be pessimistic, and please tell your volunteers that and tell them why, so that they understand the consequences of perhaps marking people down because they're feeling a little bit hopeful. It's better to do that way.
I would also add to that for 3s, you're potentially going to go back to and see if potentially, you know, maybe the candidate or some really persuasive door knockers might be able to win them round. Whereas 4s, there was just a sort of a feeling of negativity, or just that they are determined that they will never tell you who they're voting for, and so there's just no point bothering them again. Yeah, I think that's the important difference between 3 and 4. Anyway, John Barley's next in the hand up queue.
So one of the things that we've done, rather than asking, after the Canvas script's over and you say, oh, can I just check the name? One of the things we've done is said, is there anybody else in the house who is likely to be voting, and do you know who they might vote for? So rather than trying to drag somebody else out, we do mark that as a result by proxy when we get them, because it's like come from somebody else. But that can speed up the canvassing a little bit, in that you're not waiting for someone else to come to the door or for them to say, oh no. The downside is that I believe that one of my one of our local canvassers, or someone when they're out canvassing, did actually try and canvass someone who'd actually died, which is a bit of a bad thing to do, really. But just by asking, is so and so in the house? It's like, no, I'm sorry,
Right, yeah.
they passed away a week ago. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Thanks, John. That's interesting. I've not heard of folks doing that. So yeah, that's an interesting one. That. Have we got many more? Helen.
4 more hands up.
4.
Yeah.
Crikey.
Should
Okay.
we keep on going?
Let's take one more and then move on, and then if the other people can just hang on to that thought till the end, and if it's still relevant, we can pick it up again in the questions section.
So Stephen Holman's the lucky one.
Hello, Stephen.
Hi, Helen. Hi, Laurie. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. Yeah, I mean, I put these in the chat, just a couple of things to add in terms of that problem with scoring. We definitely have an overestimation in our number of G1s and G2s, because people hear, I'm going to vote Green, or I'm probably going to vote Green, and they put it down as a G1 or a G2. They never get around to asking the question, what party do you normally vote for? Yeah. Or what's your sort of historical loyalty? And so we think that our hypothesis is some of these people get to the polling station and revert to type and end up don't voting Green, and that's why we overestimate, and we've lost elections where our projections suggest we should win. So, and this happens with what you might call experienced canvassers as well as new people as well. So really always emphasising that the letter is the past, what people have done before, and the number is the future. I always find it's quite a way of people realising that, if people say I'm going to vote Green, that's just a number at that point. So I found that works really well. And then on the topic of asking for or names and knowing who you're speaking to, one thing I found quite effective is when I introduce myself at the start and say, Stephen, calling on behalf of Trafford Green Party, and at the end I just wrap up and say, thanks for your time. My name's Stephen. Sorry, I didn't catch your name. And then sometimes people say, oh, I'm Laurie. So then I know I've been speaking to Laurie rather than Helen. So that's often worked quite well as well.
I like that tip, Stephen. Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you. Yeah, people putting down 1s and 2s by default Gs, that is really quite common as well, and not necessarily true. And sometimes I've seen people do that where we've never stood a Green candidate in that area. And it's like they can't possibly have voted Green here in the past because there hasn't been a candidate. So that is a really, really common one. So yeah, that's again why it's so important to just keep embedding this with volunteers again and again and again. Okay, so right, so we touched on this for a while. So data quality, does it seem right and is it consistent? The second thing as well is you might find that there's high rates of doors being closed on people. Like one particular volunteer may come back and just be like, everyone's closing the door on me, or they're having really like negative interactions. Almost always that's a script issue. So the most common thing that comes up is we've got scripts designed for a reason because we know they're tried and tested and they work. And we don't open with, hello, I'm from the Green Party, because people instantly think, oh no, this person's going to talk at me about politics, or they've already got preconceived ideas of what the Green Party's about, etc. The way we open in the script is, hello, my name's Laurie. It's just a very quick call on behalf of your candidate, Helen, who's standing for the Green Party in the upcoming local election. And then you carry on with your spiel, you know, until you get to the question. You don't really pause or anything like that. And it's all about how you open and technique. So that, hello, my name is Laurie. Oh, there's just a smiling woman on my doorstep. That seems, you know, fairly innocuous. It's a very quick call. Oh, this person's not going to take up a lot of my time. Fine, I'll leave the door open. The scripts are like that for a reason. So if you've got a volunteer that is having a bit of a hard time of it on the doorstep, it's probably the script. They've probably gone slightly off-piste, and there's something in that script that's causing the issue. So what I always recommend is, when you are going round with your group of volunteers, kind of listen in to the conversations they're having up on the doorstep. And that way you can kind of, you know, you can pick up on little things like that and say, if you open like this, you'll usually get a better response. Maybe try that or whatever. Or you might notice that they're forgetting to ask one of the questions. So they might be forgetting to ask about, can I ask how you previously voted, for example. So if you just, when you're with volunteers, just listen in and make sure that everybody is okay and they're managing the script well, and they're having positive interactions. Embedding good practice. So one of the best things that we can do when we're asking volunteers to come out is to be really well organised. Okay, so having action days and sessions where, yeah, we've clearly thought about it. So that would involve several things, but I just want people to sort of reflect on what. So actually, you could do this either way. You could give examples of where you've seen or you've been to something that was slightly off-putting and why it was that way, but also good examples of what made good action days that you've attended or you've organised. Has anybody got any thoughts on this? Not so many hands for this one, Helen. Put it in the chat if you want, if you're shy, or I can just go into it.
Well, I'll come in, because I was very pleased with one I just did, and I have feedback. I think food is a good thing in a good action day. It's at various points, but yeah, I think being organised, having a good structure, and you know, enough sort of nice breaks and socialising bits. That's I think what kept people going, because it's been very cold, hasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, anybody else got any thoughts about good action days?
Colin Noble.
Yes, I agree with that. What I said about food, I think it's a really good motivating and comforting factor. Also, it's good to have a candidate with you or nearby. Yeah. So the candidate's nearby, or across the street, on the next street, and you can always say, would you like to meet blah blah? And often they say, yes, please. And you get that sort of interaction and that sort of human touch, which I think makes a huge difference.
Yeah, that's a great one. Thank you, Colin.
I'm also sorry about on that. I think having the candidate himself present earlier on in the program, or at least one of the key people from the Green Party, the volunteers like to meet or, you know, greet, just to show a bit of a power presence, I think also helps to get them confidence and a bit more engagement and interest from the volunteers as well. Certainly did for Bristol.
Yeah, so there's Stephen Holman again, and then Denise Crackhill.
Thanks, Helen. So trying to have meeting points near that are accessible, so, you know, near public transport or places to lock bikes up, and, you know, if you can make them near landmarks, well, for people to find if they're not familiar with the ward, is we found quite useful. Yeah,
these are all really good. Was it Denise next?
Yeah, just all the basics, have them well organised, well, you know, so you're ready, so you know exactly where you're sending people, and the boards are ready and the maps are ready, and you can direct them, and they can then get out quite quickly. I mean, socializing is good, yes, but I think people also want to get out quite quickly after they arrive and get started, not be held back because you're not quite sure where you're sending them. I've done that badly and I've done that well.
Yeah, thanks, Denise.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are all really good. So most of them are on here, but I think, like you said, Denise, it's having the basics right, isn't it? So you've got everything you need prepped. You know, you've got your maps and your scripts and your cards, and people know where they're going. Also timings, actually. We talked earlier about how we need to respect volunteers' time because they're giving it to us freely. You know, if you ask somebody, like you say, to turn up at 9:30 and they're still standing around in a car park at 10:30, you know, that's not a great use of their time or a good experience. So it's again about being efficient and being prepared. Debriefing as well. I think it's really important. Sometimes, and I've been guilty of this myself, often if we've had action days and things, we don't tell people to meet back somewhere and they're done. Very often people will come find the organiser with a script or pass it on to another volunteer or whatever. I think taking some time at the end, so even if people don't want to stay and socialise, just run through, like we said, any troubleshooting, you know, that people might need help with, or just to see how the experience was for people. I think that's really quite important as well. I haven't put on here food, but it is very important. If you possibly can, please feed people. You give people cake, they'll come back again. It's not always possible, I know, because not always people can find venues and things like that sometimes, and particularly if you're particularly rural areas. If you can at least tell people, if you're not going to provide them with food, that they'll need to bring a packed lunch or whatever, so that the poor people aren't starving hungry. And also, like you said, wherever possible, try and make it as accessible as you can. If there are challenges with that, let people know in advance. Toilets, particularly on polling day, we put on our volunteer sheets, you know, you can use a toilet at these addresses, or the big Tesco's got one or whatever, because if people are out all day long, they are going to need to know where they can go. So thinking about people's comfort as well, and also very much thanking people for their time as well when they've been out. And when we send out the follow-up email tomorrow to people who registered for this, we're going to have links to there's resources on the members site about how to run good action days as well. So there's more tips on there. I think, again, we've just got to really make best use of people's time. Again, good script. We talked about this a bit earlier, didn't we? Practice, practice, practice. Share the script with volunteers in advance as well, wherever possible, so they can see before they turn up what they're going to say. And again, just practice it. Get this is a thing that this is what we do before we go out. We practice the script. And also, we've talked about having candidates at the action days. But again, if your candidate can take the lead on this, because they are often the people that, you know, people are rallying around who they're trying to get elected. So very often the candidate can be really helpful in this. Training people, can't stress this enough. Make sure people have some kind of training, even if that's just before they go out with somebody. But that's what's going to make people feel confident. So people talked before about things that they were slightly nervous about before they went out. If people are well trained, they will be much more confident when they're doing this. And if they understand what pieces of data you're collecting and why, and how to break down those barriers with voters by sticking to a good script, that's, again, going to just maximise what we get out of canvassing and what we get from our volunteers who are giving us their time. And also, invite your field organiser along. You know, I've been to lots of places where we tag this on. So we invite people along to a training session on canvassing, and then we all go out and canvass. And I always get really good feedback from this, because very often brand new people will turn up, never done it before, a little bit uncertain. They've just done the training, then they go out with a group of people, whereas they may never have done that before, and they have a great time. And it's really positive for them. So that's a really good idea. If you can, invite your field organiser down to do a canvassing session, and then all go out together. And that makes people who are a bit nervous much more likely to go. If they've sat in a room full of people and everybody else is going, they think, oh, okay, I'll try it. And they'll go, and they'll realise that actually it's quite fun canvassing. So just to recap on what we've talked about, that the quality of canvassing is absolutely crucial to the data we get, which has a massive impact on how successful our election campaigns are. Volunteers are absolutely super. We can't do any of this without them. You're all volunteers. You know, they really need to feel valued and supported. Otherwise, they won't want to give us their time again. And our role in this is to embed that good practice and make sure that they do want to come back. The resources I talked about here about running great action days, it is on the members' site. There's lots of stuff about volunteer recruitment as well, but this will come out. Don't worry about like writing this down or anything now. The canvassing script, having a few issues today with all the links being broken to the short campaign templates on the website. So again, we'll email you out a copy of the template script that we use. As I said before, those scripts have been tweaked, honed, tried, tested. We know that they work. You will learn to say it in your own sort of style, but if you stick to that script as much as possible, you are going to be having the best conversations, and your volunteers are going to be having a much more positive time. And if anybody is unsure who their field organiser is, every single region has at least one, and Wales has the lovely Lauren as well. They are on the members' site as well. So as I promised, we can do some more questions now, but I've also put on this or tips, because like I said, the vast majority of us here will be experienced and will have a leadership role within our teams. So people might just want to, as we have been doing already tonight, just say, we had this issue, we tried this, it was great. So if people want to share tips as well as ask questions, and I will stop sharing so I can see you all. Hooray. Thank you. Right, so we've got a few hands. Do you want to keep doing the hands, Helen? Or shall I? Or do you want to keep an eye on the chat?
I'll keep an eye on the chat. And I mean, the hands are in order, so go for it.
Okay, hold on. Right, I don't know if they're in order. Oh, yes, they are in order. So it's Denise first, I think.
Okay, I thought I wasn't first.
It looks first.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to my question I didn't get in about the scoring, because we've tended to just do definites and possibles to some extent in the past, but obviously we're trying to do it properly now. And I don't quite understand the difference between the 2s and the 3s. They both seem to be possible.
Right, so your 3 will always be if people are unsure. They're not, if they haven't said, yes, they will be voting green, they are a 3 or below. The difference between a 1 and a 2 is your 1s are at, yes, definitely, I will definitely vote for them. I will take a poster, you know, the enthusiastic greens that have said that they will vote for you. And the 2 is a, yeah, I'll be voting for them. A 3 is anybody who is a mite, who, you know, cast any kind of doubt that they are going to vote for us.
Right, okay. So we tend to get mostly possibles because people don't want to say, but
you can, it's not unusual to have a lot of 3s, particularly in a first-time campaign and early on in the campaign. So if you are getting a lot of 3s now, that's quite normal, because most people will not, again, like I said earlier, will not even know there's an election happening in a couple of months, let alone that be in the front of their mind. So if you canvass them very early in the campaign, they genuinely don't know because they haven't thought about it. But it's still worth that conversation early with people, because you plant the seed there then. So as I talked about, one of the reasons we knock is to carve out a bit of space in people's, you know, day for them to actually start thinking about who they're going to vote for. And until we ask them that question, very often they won't have given it a second thought.
Okay. It's David Wells who's next in the queue.
It's Dave. Hello, Dave.
Sorry, Laurie, I've used my Sunday name, haven't I? Yeah.
You have.
I'm interested to know what when people are going to start, or it sounds like some people have already started for canvassing for the May elections, and we haven't yet. We do most of our canvassing in the evenings, and obviously it's still dark at the moment. And I think there's every danger of starting too early, when people haven't even realised there is an election. So I'm interested to hear what, when people are planning to start if they haven't already started. And yeah, I must say about the we tend not to do action days nowadays. I've been scarred for life, a particular year when we were organising action days and got loads of people organised, and then it's rained all day and you still feel you have to turn out because you've organised it. So it's much easier to to have a few people going out in the evening times. But yeah, sorry.
Okay. So the first question was about when we start canvassing. So there is a slight difference here between what we call soft canvassing and persuasion canvassing. So soft canvassing, you would do all year round, okay, because you would still get a lot of valuable data. So even if you're getting a lot of threes, that's telling you that there's people there that are persuadable. Helen's said earlier, you will often send the candidate back to threes or whatever. If you can find those threes early on and then go back to them in the short campaign, you are still making the best use of your time. Anyone that's not familiar with the difference between soft and persuasion canvassing, again, maybe drop your field organiser a line. But essentially, soft canvassing is what we do year round, where we do a general knock. So hi, it's a quick call on behalf of your candidate or your councillor, see if everything's okay in the area, have a quick chat with the resident. Then you would say, can I ask who you'd normally vote for in local council elections? That's your letter. Then you would say, is voting for our candidate something you might consider this time round? That's your number. But with the soft canvassing, you don't then follow up with what we would call the squeeze message. So in canvassing proper, and you'll see if you're not familiar with this, when you look at the script, depending on what people tell you in that second question, you would then deliver a targeted message on the doorstep as well as in literature. So for example, if you're in a very Tory facing ward, you're the second, you're second place to win, you find a Labour voter. With persuasion canvassing, you would then say, Labour don't have enough support here to win. Most Labour voters are switching to the Greens because they don't want another Conservative councillor. Is voting for Dave something you'd consider this time round? With the soft canvassing, you don't do that part, but you would still be asking. And so I would say, Dave, do it any time of year, as much as you can. With regards to action days, usually I say do both because I would, wouldn't I? What most campaigns tend to do in the short campaign is they organise a few big action days throughout the short campaign where they try and get lots of volunteers in, but they supplement that with smaller teams going out regularly throughout the week as well. I am of the opinion that you can never get too many volunteers doing enough stuff, but I think we do appreciate that they can take a lot of organising. However, canvassing or delivering in the rain gets you amazing brownie points from residents. If you are out there with an umbrella and an anorak, you are just reinforcing that message of how hardworking we are, and people love it.
Yeah, but
also, you'll find your conversations do tend to be quite brief because people don't want to stand there with the door wide open if it's cold and raining. So you'll be very efficient that day. I think we've got Emmy. Hello.
Hi. Yes, well, yesterday was so cold, people didn't even want to open their doors. There were all these cars in the drives and they just weren't opening their doors. But anyway, I had a question about picking the areas. As you know, Laurie, we've started late. We didn't have a long campaign. We started in September. We're not going to get around all the houses. I hope that's not, who knows, we might, but I want to try and maybe prioritize areas. I've been almost randomly selecting areas to go to, and is there any guidance on this?
Yeah, I will tell you what I think. Helen might want to chip in here as well, maybe. If you are going to need to make decisions about which doors to knock, I think you can probably do it, Emmy. We'll drag the rest of West Northamptonshire down and get your doors knocked. But in the short campaign, try and go to all your postal voters first. because obviously when they get their postal ballot, we more or less assume that the election is done for them. Okay. Yeah. So you really do need to get to them first. So prioritise postal voters first. In terms of where you go, you need to look at population centres and density and turnout. So you go to the places that you can get to the most voters in the most efficient time and then work outwards. So to give you an example of my ward here, we have 2 very big villages, which are quite densely, with housing, and part of a town, which is the same. And then we've got about 4 or 5 little villages where everything's all scattered about. What we did is we put it in priority order like that. So the smallest village with the lowest turnout was bottom of the list.
Right.
Okay? Because you have least voters there. You need to get to as many voters as you can, as quickly as you can. So that's usually the way to do it. And you can also do things like look at your polling districts and see what the turnout is again. So if you've got a polling district that's got a 40% turnout, try and do that one over one that's got like, a 10% one, because you've got more voters in the other one. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Helen.
And like you've said everything because you're brilliant. It's Duncan Ali next.
Duncan?
Yeah, hi, thank you. Yeah, I think along the same lines as Emmy, if you're short on time or indeed short on volunteers, is there a way of running the campaign, even through the script, of speeding things up and getting through more conversations without alienating people?
You just have to be quite efficient. So if you are sticking to the script and you're quite disciplined about not going off message, okay, you should only be on people's doorstep for a couple of minutes maximum. That can get much trickier for the candidate, okay? There's my original ward, which is now one village of a bigger ward. That's a long story. I can't canvass there anymore because I cannot not have those conversations with people. And I'm lucky if I get around 4 houses in half an hour. So with your volunteers, they should just be sticking to the script. If, again, maybe it's worth going back and looking at the basic canvassing training, but if people bring up questions, or for example, if somebody says, oh, we've had a lot of car break-ins in the area, the volunteer can say, I'm very sorry to hear that, and our candidate does know about it. I will pass this on to them. All their details are on the card. Simple things like that, where you aren't dismissing people, but you're moving on quite quickly. Candidates might get trickier. A bit of a tip that I use myself is if people start to talk to you about an issue, be really empathetic and polite and say, I am really sorry to hear about this issue. I know it's been a problem here. I'm out with the team and they're moving down the street and I'm going to lose them. I really do want a conversation about this with you. My phone number is on the card. If you give me a ring, I'm very happy to talk about it with you, but when I've got a bit more time to listen. So there are ways of keeping it short. But it is hard for candidates. I'm not going to gloss over that one.
On to John Barley.
Hello, John.
So in terms of efficiency, there's no point knocking on a door if the person or the residents don't vote. So on your canvas sheet, you should not have any households where there are no voters. And when you're going through the electoral register and putting the marks on from the marked register for the local elections, you'd be surprised how many people don't vote.
Yeah, John's exactly right. So if anybody here is not familiar with that, we use the marked register from the council and we talk to people who vote in local elections, because those people are the people that we need to speak to persuade. It is almost impossible to get a non-voter to start voting and then vote for us. But people who vote for opposition parties in a local election are persuadable and we can switch them. And that's one of the reasons we need data. And then it's like 2 for the price of 1. If you're up against Labour, if you switch one of their voters to you, you've gained a vote, they've lost one. So thank you for raising that, John, because that is really important. We only knock on the doors of people who use their vote in a local election.
As well as being very efficient, I think I also want to share my top tip about how to make sure you get more volunteers. I'd say for all the people that are already signing up to do stuff with you, the best thing I found was during each action day, I was looking through all of the data as it came in and tallying up how many doors we'd knocked on and how many conversations we'd had. And by the end of the day, I was telling people, wow, you know, this is what we've achieved and how many deliveries we've done as well. And when including that in my follow-up email with everyone who turned up, and including that in a follow-up email with everyone who'd said they were going to come and then they didn't. So they were getting that nice little reminder that, oh, even though you didn't come, we got lots done. Imagine how much more we'd get done if you'd turned up. So obviously not saying it like that, but you know what I mean. So I think that feedback, and people did comment to me that feedback helped them finally turn up and help them keep on coming. And then also another really important thing is using door knocking to recruit more activists. So make sure your script is asking the ones and maybe the twos as well. Brilliant. You want to get involved, because those residents who can, you know, deliver to the streets around them are golden, and release the members to do more door knocking. So yes, hurrah for that. Right, Stephen Holman.
Sorry, struggled to get myself off mute there. Thanks, Helen. Yeah, so just sort of little builds on some of the bits that have, or points that have been sort of brought up. So one of the other reasons about density, focusing on the density of the ward, makes you get out the vote on election day much easier. Because if you've got a limited number of volunteers and you know to knock on all the doors and deliver your reminder card, etc., it doesn't matter where the voters come from as long as you get them out. And so that helps if you focus on getting your data from those areas. That can really be quite a good way of maximising efficiency. On the point you were making, Laurie, about the sort of candidates getting stuck on the doorstep, we have because we tend to try and at least knock in pairs or go out as a team, and we try and keep an eye on each other and make sure if people are getting stuck on the doorstep, try and sort of rescue them. So sort of saying we're moving, someone sort of going up the door, out the driveway as well, sort of saying, oh, we're heading off to the next street now, come on, really sort of that kind of thing, because we've often find it's harder to get out of a conversation yourself, whereas if someone's getting you out of it, it tends to work a bit easier. So we've used that in our local party, and then the other sort of build on point you've just made, Helen, about getting people involved. We have sort of what we call step down asks. So we say, would you be prepared to get involved? And some people say, oh no, I'm time poor, or that kind of thing. So you say, well, we have a poster. And then you normally get, if someone said no to one thing, they're more likely to say yes to another. So even if we can't get them to help us deliver or whatever, then we get they're more likely to have the poster or the stake board or whatever, which they might not have said yes to the first time if that had been the first question. So we have those kind of repeated asks, and if we sometimes get to a third ask of, well, we donate to us, and some people, if they're time poor and say they're not prepared to show their kind of political persuasion, they might be prepared to put their hand in the pocket. So we find that's quite useful, that people struggle to say no several times. So that's something, again, on engagement, we found very, very effective.
Yeah, that can sometimes work as well for members. So you'll find if people do phone banking and things like that, and you've got scripts and whatever, you can sometimes build that into scripts as well, where you would ask people, can you come to an action day? Oh no, I can't help next weekend. Okay, can we drop some leaflets around? Oh no, we can't. Okay, can you donate £10 to the campaign? Yes, they will. So that is quite a good tip, I think. But again, it's about using your judgment. You need to have a feel for how that's going on the doorstep, but I'm sure that try and do that, Stephen. No Trafford, how I know Trafford. Have we got any more hands? I don't think we have. Is there anything in the chat, Helen, that wants reading out?
I did make a note that someone asked for a link to the beginners training that you did, and I wondered if maybe that could be in the email.
Yeah.
And the links, just, you know, for people if they're wanting to share those with their teams, the link to those slides and maybe to your presentation as well, the video.
Yeah. So I will do that. So our activism manager, Emma, will be sending out the email. So I will ask her to add that in. But I think if it's not already up there, there is the same training from I think last year or the year before about canvassing basics. So I think there may already be something up there on the members site under the training section. And it is essentially the same training as well. So if the recording from last time is not yet ready, it might not be. There's something already in there. But I will ask if Emma can put that in with the resources. So we'll be sending out, like I said, what makes a good action day, a Canvas script, and also a feedback form. Which brings me nicely on to Helen. Can you drop it in the chat? We'd really appreciate if people filled in the feedback form on this. Any feedback is great. It's all constructive. Anything that can help us improve the session or what went really well just makes it better for last time. So if people could fill in that feedback form, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you. Did I just see another hand? Was that you, Emmy?
Well, I didn't know if we just had a very quick moment going back to the codes, because someone yesterday said, surely we shouldn't have the same code for won't say and don't know. The won't say is being on the ruder side. And I think none of us quite knew whether we seem to be scoring the same for people saying, well, I don't know, or I genuinely can't remember who I voted for. And I don't know who I'm going to vote for. And I don't want to say, I don't talk about who I'm voting for. And no, I'm not going to tell you how I'm voting. And I saw her point. Any feedback from you guys?
I think this is where how we touched about consistency and training and checking in. So you need to have a conversation there about how you're interpreting those things.
Yeah.
People are going to interpret that slightly different, aren't they? So it might be a case of, again, you listen in or you go round with the canvasser for a little bit who's unsure. And if they say, right, I'm putting them down as a 4.
Yes.
And you think they're a 3, that's when you can figure out that's about the consistency in it. Yeah. Because they're all those numbers are slightly open to interpretation. It's about making sure your team is doing it with some consistency.
Yeah. Good answer. Thank you.
We've got John again, and I'll probably make this the last question actually now because we're nearly at 8.
It's more of a comment in response to Emmy's question. Yeah. We actually mark would not says and don't knows in the same way that we mark up Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrats. We interpret the would not says, we look at the ward and go, well, it's mainly Conservative and mainly Labour, therefore it's likely they're going to go with whatever the ward leaning is. Don't knows, generally just mark them as a 3. They don't know. They really don't know.
Mm. So some people do genuinely forget, especially if you've got quite long election cycles. So if you've got if you're in a unitary, for example, it's been nearly 4 years since somebody last voted in a local council election. They may genuinely have forgotten.
And also ward churn is a thing. I mean, some of the wards in Darlington, in a 4-year period, you've got 10-15% turnover of residents in households. So whether if they were there last time, they may be voting differently than where they were previously. So I mean,
yeah, and that's all the more reason to be ensuring that your volunteers are asking the question about how they've previously voted. So, for example, if that particular voter doesn't know that it's between X party and the Greens, they may carry on voting for the third party that they always vote for, thinking that ward is the same as where they lived before, but it might not be. So that voter is really going to need that targeted message. So yeah, it's a good point.